you all for coming. Let's go ahead and get started with the presentation today. I really appreciate that everybody came in for the cultural diversity training, and our speaker today is Jaklyn Hill, and she's Executive Director of the Owensboro Human Relations Commission. So I'm gonna just turn it over to her.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for being here. I hope everybody is got here safe and is ready to have a little fun. I try to make these presentations as fun as I can, so hopefully we won't feel like we're just sitting in a meeting. So my name is Jaklyn Hill. Like you said, I'm the Executive Director for the Owensboro Human Relations Commission. I have with me today Ms. Becky, who is our Community Coordinator. We do a lot of programming like this where we come to community organizations, businesses, and do these free trainings that allow us to educate people and help them connect better with both clients and other members of staff and stuff like this. So hopefully today we can get some understanding going and start thinking about some concepts that have been very popular hot button topics and concepts that have been being incorporated in a lot of different businesses. So I'm excited to get started today. So the title of our presentation is Intro to DEI, which I'll tell you what that acronym means here shortly, and how to get to belong. That's kind of our tagline today. Everybody here wants to feel like they belong and wants the people they work with to feel like they belong. So give me a minute while I try to make sure I can operate this thing. There we go. Okay. So just some openings to what we're going to be discussing today. Today we will talk about what DEI is and why it's important. We will discuss cultural competency, which is one of the biggest topics that we kind of take with us when we go and do these presentations, as well as bias and privilege. And we will touch on some intersectionality. So to get us started, I have a little introduction activity. You don't have to write anything down. It's just something that we can kind of think about. And since we do have so many people here today, you don't all have to go. But if you get the chance to just think about this, that would be great. And just keep what you come up with for answers for these in mind as we move forward with this presentation. So I call this activity PIG, which stands for Purpose, Intention, and Goals. So I'm gonna give you kind of a few minutes to kind of think about these as I go over them. And then I'm gonna go around the room and I'm gonna have some people who would like to introduce themselves and give us their purpose, intention, and goals for today. All right? So purpose, I want you to think about what purpose do you have as part of this board, as part of this organization, in the work that you do. What do you hope to fulfill as a member of this staff, so to speak, or as a member of this board? For intentions, I want you to think of what are your intentions for today? What are your intentions to come into this presentation, to come into this environment today? What do you intend to learn? What do you intend to take from this? And then goal, I want a goal that comes with learning DEI. What kind of goal from this learning portion do you think you can accomplish with help of what we might discuss today? So I'll give everybody a minute, and if somebody would like to go ahead and go, just start with your name and your title. And I have candy and I got pins, so if you're feeling like you need a little bit of enticement this morning, I do have prizes.
I'll go first really quick. Again, my name is Becky. Jaklyn introduced you guys to me. I am the Community Outreach Coordinator for the Owensboro Human Relations Commission. My purpose on my staff at the Human Relations Commission, which I'm not sure if you guys have kind of a similar organization here in the E-Town area, but my purpose is to reach all the different communities within our community. So as you guys are aware of, I'm sure in this area as well, you have your larger community of everybody that lives in this area, but then within that community, there's certain kind of subsets and subcultures within those communities, but specifically for our goals, like with GRAD, the Green River Area Development District, we focus on the aging population and some of the discriminations that they might face as they age. But we also work with youth programming, all different cultures within our organization and our community. So that's kind of my purpose, is to reach them and make them know who we are and what we do and how we can support them in their goals within the community. The intention here today is, obviously you guys are a little bit outside of our area, but whenever we did our presentation in Owensboro, they reached out and you guys reached out to us to come and bring the information here. So the intention is to just share the knowledge that we have, open some conversations, and hopefully leave you guys with some ideas that you hadn't thought of before you came in this morning. And then the goal for the training, again here, whenever you guys leave the room, is that hopefully some of the ideas, even maybe some of the ideas that you have surrounding the idea of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, maybe that'll be challenged a little bit, and you'll really think about how you can apply the things that we've talked about today in your everyday life.
Anyone else wanna go?
Sure, I'll go.
Absolutely.
Jason Root, I'm the Director of Public Works on Fort Knox, and I think that my purpose here is to either take the greater community's concern and see how they apply to Fort Knox, and then also communicate how Fort Knox's concerns, go out to the community. My intention always is to see if there's opportunities to do things better, and save money, quite frankly, and while doing the missions that we have to do. And then my goal is, the federal government has a lot of DEI training that we already do. And so if there's other nuggets that I can bring back, cause I have to do this for my organization, so if there's nuggets that either I can share from our perspective or pick up something new from you guys, that'd be great, so.
Absolutely, thank you. Does anyone else want to go? I know it's still kind of early, you don't know me too well, so.
I'll go.
Absolutely, go ahead.
Richard Cerisi, I'm the mayor of West Point, Kentucky, and it is in Hardin County. My purpose on this board is to improve the quality of life of everybody we serve and touch. I think that's pretty simple. My intention is I was raised Catholic, so I feel guilty if I'm not qualified in service. So, it's true. Sorry. And then, I'm really here to learn what DEI is about. I hear a lot about it, but I'm here to seek the truth. Let's put it that way.
Thank you so much. So if you don't, oh, yes.
I'll go.
Love it.
I'm Brian Clayton, I'm mayor for City of Brandenburg. My purpose would be to take what I will learn in this training and facilitate and coordinate our efforts with our existing city employees to make sure that we provide a healthy work environment. The intention would be to take what I've learned to do, to try to integrate that into the way that I try to take care of business. And my goal would be to give thought to new ideas and new concepts, and maybe do self-evaluation to see if there are some issues. I don't think there are, but try to reflect on those to see if there's things I need to do to make sure that we present an environment of a welcoming, no biases environment, and in particular, relating to the interaction we have with minority trustees who work with our city crew. That's our single biggest challenge, and that would be my goal, is to make sure that we manage our local employees and that they realize that those trustees are valued partners for the job they're doing for the city. That would be the biggest issue of concern for me.
Thank you. All right. So if you didn't speak, that's perfectly fine. Just keep kind of this purpose and intention and goals in mind as we move forward today. If you don't quite know what that is right now, one of those is right now, that's okay. By the end of this presentation, I hope you have a good idea of what you can take from this presentation back to your jobs, back to your communities, right? So this is always a really fun activity. I do encourage you to try this in other settings. It is a good way to get an idea of where you need to and where you want to move forward. Okay, so the biggest question we always get is, what is DEI? It's a word that's thrown around a lot. It's a word that's being used more frequently in business, but a lot of people don't really know what it means. Essentially, it breaks down into diversity, equity, and inclusion. A lot of times you'll do DEIB, which adds in that belonging portion, which, as I said, is kind of our goal. The goal for DEI is to have a community where everyone feels like they belong. So essentially, it's a set of values that organizations are beginning to adopt to create spaces where all members of the community feel like they're served, they feel safe, and they feel welcome, with a conscious effort to address differences in race, ethnicity, religion, ability, gender, sexual orientation, etc. and to do that in a respectful way. So diversity, which is the D portion, is recognizing the social and cultural differences that may affect your interactions with others. E is for equity, which is treating all people fairly while focusing on each individual group and what they may need from your organization in order to succeed. So equity is not just saying, okay, we're all equal, it's saying we all deserve to be equal, but some portions of our community may need additional support, they need additional resources so that we can all be on a level playing field, right? And then inclusion, which is working to create a space that welcomes the voices and unique perspectives of all those individuals in your community that may have differing opinions, belief systems, values, and resulting in the betterment of the community as a whole. And then of course, belonging, which means not only feeling as though you have a place at the table, but feeling as though that you belong at the table, that people care that you're at the table. I think there's very much a difference between being present in a conversation and feeling as though you can speak in that conversation and feel comfortable doing so. And so that's that belonging portion. We would want everybody to feel as though they can come forward and be a part of our communities, but we also have to assure that they feel as though they belong in the community, that the community is also a part of them, right? I think that's a good way to describe those. I'm the kind of presenter that if you have questions, if you have additional remarks, if I ask a question and you think you've got a good answer, feel free to interact with me on that. I'm not one of those that wants you to wait to the end of the presentation to ask questions, because I think by the end of the presentation you may have forgot. I may be on a completely different point by then. So if you have any questions or comments throughout this, feel free to interrupt. I think that conversation is really beneficial for discussions like this.
One way that the whole idea of belonging was presented to me previously that really kind of made it sink in a little bit for me is kind of the idea of, so I don't know if any of you have kids, especially in elementary school, but my kids, if they want to invite one or two friends from school, from their class to their birthday party, the rule is, well, if you invite one kid, you have to invite everybody to the party. If you bring invitations to the class, then you have to issue an invitation to everybody in the class. So that would kind of be that diversity, that everybody is invited, right, to the party. But that belonging portion is if everybody actually shows up. So if all 32 kids from my, daughter's class show up to the birthday party, are we only gonna be excited about the kids that my kid actually wanted to be there, or that my kid really wanted to invite it, or are we gonna make every single kid that shows up to that party feel like they belong at that party? And there is a difference. If you, even as an adult, if you have been invited somewhere, a social situation, and you maybe think, oh, I got a pity invite, but you show up anyway, and then you can tell immediately that you're not really a part of the crowd. The belonging portion of this is really making a concerted effort that every single person that shows up, that's invited to the party, feels like they have a space there and like people want them there. So that's just a good way to think about it, that you can maybe relate to a little bit better in your everyday life.
Yeah, that's a wonderful addition. Thank you. So like I said, questions, concerns, please pull it into it. Like I said, if you've got a great example that connects to what we were saying, like Becky did, absolutely add it in there. So why is DEI important? I feel like we're all here for a reason, that they told us we had to be here, that it's one of those things that's mandatory, and that's understandable. But I think if we really think about why it's so important and why they're making these things mandatory and making us come to these things, it's gonna help us understand what this kind of means for us. So it's early. Both interpersonally and politically, it's become more and more important to kind of incorporate these values into organizational structures and policy, because it encourages respect and prevents discrimination, which is one of the main things that we deal with in our office, is filing those discrimination cases. So we like coming as a preventative measure. If you're more educated on how to treat people and how to interact with them, there's less chances of there being any kind of misunderstanding, right? Creates a welcoming environment for both clients and staff. It builds on previously established policies and procedures with all people in mind. So that means that if you've had a policy or a procedure that's been around for 20, 30, 50 years, it can take that policy and recognize that with a changing demographic in your community, the wording of this policy, the way in which it's executed may change for the betterment of both you and the people that it applies to, right? addressing changes in demographic in a community as it evolves. I think all of us have seen changes in demographic. I know I'm from Owensboro, which in some ways is a bigger town than what some of you may be dealing with, but I think we all have seen the changes in demographic over the past however long you've, been in your place, your position. And also shows a proactive front in addressing social and cultural issues in your community. So you may not see a problem, but that doesn't mean we don't work to prevent things from happening in the first place, right? If we're working to make sure we're addressing issues before they come up, before they become a problem, then we're being proactive and preventing things at the start, right? So what might be risks today or in the future if we don't incorporate those ideas? Okay. Attraction of new talent and retention of those already on board. So whether we're talking about a large scale, attracting new businesses, attracting new organizations and people to your community, we're talking on a small scale of attracting new staff and clientele for your business. Not having DEI policy in mind and procedures and values can drastically influence who wants to come on board, who wants to interact and network with you. Client dissatisfaction and lack of service utilizations. So for places like here and like Grad, they have a lot of portions of what they do that are serving a particular community. If members of those particular community do not feel as though they have a sense of belonging at the table, don't feel like they're being heard and listened to, don't feel like they have a voice, they're less likely to utilize those services. So let's say an organization is working with young people, and their job is to help young people get into colleges and get the programs they need to survive, right? If those students, if those young people don't feel as though their voice is being listened to, don't feel as though their concerns are being heard, and they don't feel like they belong, they're not gonna wanna utilize that service. They're not gonna wanna come in. They're gonna find other resources, or they're not gonna use a resource at all, right? And so making sure that you're kind of incorporating and acknowledging where the differences lie and how you can address each individual and each group is a great way to make sure that people are utilizing the service that you guys provide. A creation of a space where people don't feel seen, heard, or safe. I think as human beings, we've all been in spaces where we don't feel seen, heard, and safe, and that can be detrimental to anything we're trying to accomplish. And if the space that you're working in, the space that you are required to be in, isn't somewhere where you feel safe, seen, and heard, then it's gonna be difficult for you to get anything done, right? And that goes for clients, it goes for staff, it goes for anybody that you're working alongside, right? And then collaboration with businesses, organizations, and individuals who value DEI efforts. As it's becoming more and more important and more incorporated into businesses, people are noticing when other places aren't working with DEI and aren't trying to accomplish things through DEI, and that makes them less likely to want to associate with places that don't seem to care about DEI. So, yes, it's a hot button topic right now, but it is incredibly important. Does anyone else have any comments, questions?
I'll throw one out there, that part about seen, heard, and safe. It's, I live in a world where it's been a while since I've not felt safe, seen, or heard, and and sometimes you have to step back and realize that just because I feel that way doesn't mean everybody does, so.
Yeah, that's a wonderful perspective to have. I think that's important for us to remember as we move forward and talk about things. That just because you're in a place where you are secure doesn't mean that every person around you feels like they can walk into the same space and feel secure.
And that's kind of the goal with all of the conversations and trainings that we have, is to understand your perspective is not everybody's perspective. So just because you feel safe at work, or you feel represented at work, or in a community, doesn't mean that the person sitting beside you has that same feeling of security and comfort.
Absolutely. So what does DEI mean to you as an organization and you as an individual? So obviously we talked about the population of individuals you serve has been and will continue to change for the coming years. Evolving social and cultural ideas, norms that we must recognize to adequately serve these new population of people. Current and future staff represent a diverse community as well. Again, as the people in your communities change, that means people that you're hiring are gonna change. People you're interacting with on the street are gonna change. Policies and procedures shouldn't be static. It should stay the same the entire time you've had that. We ourselves are even going through that. We were created in 72 and are currently working through strategic planning and changing our policies and procedures, because if we stay static and keep the same policies we've always had, then we're missing out on the opportunity to grow and to change those things to be more applicable to the people we serve and to, ourselves as we change and develop. Awareness and education creates respect and allows for growth. I think we've all been in a situation where we've learned something about an individual or a group, and that's allowed us to form a better connection with them than we could have without that information. Creating a culture of respect and kindness better equips you to serve all the individuals within your community who would benefit from any kind of service or any kind of thing that you provide. Does anyone else think of anything that would answer the question, what does DEI mean to you?
I'll give you a scenario, if you will. A lot of the people in this room are elected officials, and we appoint boards and committees. And I've been the county judge of Washington County. I'm responsible for several boards and committees. So when I appoint people to those boards, I want the committee and the boards to look like the people in the community.
Exactly.
Yep.
Meaning, you don't want 6 men, white men on a board when you've got 20% African American and 50% women. So you want to diversify, and as leaders, we need to be conscious of that when we appoint these board members, because the boards and councils should look like the community.
Absolutely.
And it's easy, I think, especially with elected positions. I know we struggle with that in our area too. It's kind of like a tradition thing. If it's been a certain way and looked a certain way for so long, then people that represent the others in your community may not feel like they belong in that space. So it might not even occur to them to join a committee or to run for office, because traditionally, people that look like them have not been in those positions. So creating that atmosphere of community and diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging really opens the door for the possibility for people that would be an incredible asset, but because of the way things have been in the past, do not feel like it's a space for them.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you both. Oh, yes, absolutely.
Got a quick question. Do you have examples for policy changes within organizations or nonprofit or?
Yes.
Examples?
Yeah, I can offer one from our own as well. So we, like I said, we've been, as an organization, reviewing our policies and procedures. And one of the policies that we have in place is obviously maternity leave. It's a place that a lot of places have in place. Maternity leave is a big deal, but as our communities are changing and developing, we've kind of changed the wording on that. So it's not just actively, giving birth to a child. We've made sure that it includes people who are adopting a child and need to take that time to form that connection and prepare for that child to arrive, as well as changing it from maternity leave to parental leave, because if we ever have a male on board who is having a child, whose wife is having a child, who's adopting a child, anything like that, they just still deserve to have that time where they can spend time at home, help with the child, connect with the child, and all those other things that need to. And I'm coming from a space where I don't have kids, but I think for those of you who do, that you can understand why that is so important. And so that is something that has changed over the last 10 years. A lot of companies are changing that policy to reflect, men as well as women in that process, right? So I think that's a really good example.
Yeah, and that's kind of just like a cultural shift too, just among everybody. So not necessarily marginalized populations, but just in general, it's becoming more acceptable for men whenever they have a new child in their home to take a little bit of time off work and to have this space, because I know for most men, providing financially for a new family is a very important thing. It's a valuable thing to them. But if they have the space and the security to also be able to spend some time with their new family member while still providing financially for their family, then they're able to meet both of those needs. So, our policies, have been around for a very long time. So to look at those and see, how does this adequately take care of potential new staff members in the future, or would this be something that would not allow them to have that work-life balance and be able to take care of their family the way that they want to? So that's just one.
Yeah, another really great example that's might be more common to hear about or more like to think about is if you have a policy at your particular business that says that people are allowed to wear hats and head coverings and stuff like that, then you realize that you have a large population of people who do it for religious or cultural reasons. Changing that, the way that is worded and that policy to make sure that you're not singling them out and making them feel like they are, having to, remove or feel uncomfortable at work because they're allowed to wear it, whatever that may be, you can change that policy, that procedure, update it so that you're accommodating that cultural difference, right? And so that's another good way to think about it. But that's a great question. I think that's, we can think of 1,000 examples of how we can change policy, even just the wording in which we use, to make people feel more heard when they are, having to deal with those policies, right? Okay, so now we're gonna get to one of my favorite portions of the topics that I've had for today, which is cultural competency. So the textbook definition of cultural competency is the ability to understand, appreciate, communicate with, and interact effectively with people from cultures or belief systems different from one's own that cross culture, faith, race, etc. I think that gives us a good idea, but I like to break it down. So cultural competency is a set of skills, is a skill or a set of skills that we use to better relationships and create connections with those around us. Some of us may be just naturally more adept at this because we've been around and other people different from us our entire lives. Other people grew up in communities or in situations where the people that are around them were all the same. Being good at this and bad at this really isn't something that we can feasibly see or understand. So it doesn't make you a good person or a bad person one way or the other. It's just simply the interactions we have had with others in our lifetime reflect on how culturally competent we may be in certain situations, right? We all learn how important it is to respect people's differences than people different from ourselves while giving ourselves the freedom and the power to stay true to our identity and beliefs. That's something that a lot of people misunderstand when they're learning about DEIB, diversity, equity, bias, and privilege, all that. They think they have to give up a part of themselves. That's not what it's about. We want you to maintain your identity, your beliefs, your values, the things about you that make you who you are as a person, while still understanding that everybody else that you interact with has that same value and beliefs that are important to who they are as a person, right? And you can respect that identity and that belief and show them a place where they belong by addressing and recognizing their identity and beliefs while staying true to who you are as a person.
And this is kind of a silly example, but I really like food, so I'm going to give it as my example. So we have a board member who, due to her religious beliefs, does not eat meat. She is vegetarian. I love meat. So when we have our board meetings, we make sure to accommodate that, and not just, one crappy salad. We make sure, if we order from Chipotle, we make sure that there is a protein option for her to add to her food. So we want her to show up and be excited about the food just like we're excited about the food. So being culturally competent, that's a mouthful, is understanding, okay, not only we have to accommodate because she's vegetarian, right? That's not how we want to approach it. We want to approach it that we want Dr. Shalon at our table, we value her ideas, and we want her to be excited for lunch just like we're excited for lunch. So if we can provide her an option that allows her to be true to herself, but then also I can add as much chicken to my Chipotle bowl as I want, and I can enjoy my food and be true to who I am, but also make sure that she feels safe at that same space to be true to who she is. So that's just kind of a silly example, but also a very relevant example of what that could look like.
Also, we had Chipotle in our last meeting.
Yes. We get excited about what we're going to order.
Yeah, we do. But, there is a difference between just making sure someone is accommodated and making sure they're accommodated and they feel like they're a part of whatever is going on in that space, right? All right. I thought I saw a question about that, but someone's scratching. I'm sorry. So why is cultural competency important? I always like to harp on why we do these things and not just give you what it is without explaining to you why people care. First and foremost, because it allows us to do our jobs better. Not just more effectively, but with more consideration and kindness and understanding for others, and it allows us to work with people in a way that's not just beneficial to us, not just beneficial to them, but beneficial to everyone and the work environment as a whole, right? Because without it, we lose an opportunity to build relationships. We create a higher risk of misunderstanding and hurt feelings, which can always lead to just situations that we don't want to get into, and can reduce bias, and hurt feelings and bias that we can harm people unintentionally with. I think that unintentional portion is a big part of it. I don't think anyone in this room would go forward trying to harm somebody, especially based on their race, religion, or faith of any kind. But that unintentional unintentional portion comes from just not understanding and not knowing how to connect with them in a different way, right? So, the first part of cultural competency is understanding what culture is. I think we have a tendency to think of culture as something other people have, right? But culture is a part of who we are, it's a part of where we are, how we grew up, how we live our lives. It is a part of each of us individually. We're all from Kentucky. Who here likes country music? Raise your hand. Yeah, I feel like that's a cultural thing. That's very much a part of us as a community, as us as a state, us as Southerners, right? Who here likes biscuits and gravy? Right? Who doesn't? Now, people outside of our culture, that may be something, they may not even know what I'm talking about. If I went to Britain and I said biscuits and gravy, they'd be confused, because biscuits there is more of a scone or a cookie. And they'd be confused as to why I'm putting gravy on it, right? And so we can see how these are portions of our culture, because culture is community, it's values, it's food and drink, it's art, music, and film, it's possessions, it's the tools we use, it's techniques and skills we have, traditions and rituals, language, knowledge, and stories. So not even just, this is my big list of things, but it breaks down into, some people call a shopping cart at Walmart a buggy, some people call it a cart. If someone here has tennis shoes on, you can call them tennis shoes, you can call them sneakers, running shoes. That is a language that's based on how you grew up and how your family may have referred to that particular item. It can be regional, and it's a part of your culture. So I like to ask the question when I talk about culture to kind of get us thinking. What is one part of your culture, as in the things listed here, that you believe that someone else in this room may not have experienced? Anybody?
I can give an example of my husband's culture and the culture he grew up in that it took me a while to understand. So my husband was raised in a very rural area, way out in the boonies, and he was raised primarily by male figures, so very traditionally masculine men, his grandfather, his dad, and his kind of value in who he was as a person was based on the ability to fix things, the ability to see a broken down tractor and not have to call somebody to come fix it, but to roll up his sleeves, pull his tools out, and fix it. And that is very much part of the culture of his family. And whenever they're looking at outsiders, people that don't share that same culture, if it's a man or a male, even my sons who are teenagers, if they don't have that kind of desire or know-how to fix things, to work really hard and produce something with their hands, they struggle to see the value in that individual. Some of you may have similar backgrounds with your own culture. So it's both a good thing in their culture and can kind of hold them back from seeing other people in a respectful way. Because in other, kids that grew up in town may not have any of that experience. But for him, it was very a cultural thing, not just bringing value to himself, but a family culture thing, something that he did together with his dad and grandfather. So even though we grew up literally 20 minutes apart, the things that we valued and how we spent our time on the weekends and whatever was dramatically different. So that's kind of been a cultural adjustment for us just as a family. And it's something maybe you don't think about when you think about culture.
Does anyone else want to add anything to that? I think a good one that might connect with some people is that techniques and skills. So, for example, my grandfather was a mechanic. There are certain techniques and skills that people who are my age and my gender may not necessarily have because they were never taught that. So sometimes there's sets of skills that are culturally specific, like fixing things, having that mechanical knowledge that people who didn't grow around people that were teaching them that wouldn't know. Music and film is a good one as well. There's certain movies that are generational. Certain movies that I would cherish and think are so funny and great from my childhood that you probably either never saw or saw with maybe even other people and were like, I don't get it. So we can understand how culture is very much applicable to us as individuals. And that's something to think about, because just as all these things are very applicable to you, they're applicable to everybody else. And they're different among all of us, right? And so that's just a really good way to think about culture. So, keep that in mind and think about that. Hopefully one day you'll be doing something, hanging out with your family, and realize that something you're doing or something you're saying is.
Oh, I thought of another one that's really funny.
Go for it.
Speaking of my husband's family being from way out in the sticks, so is anybody here
It's getting
from
worse.
literally like way out, like you live way out? Nobody? Oh goodness. Okay, yeah, all right. I was gonna say, come on, there's not. We're in Elizabethtown. There's got to be somebody that's from way out. So a couple of weeks ago, we were sitting on their front porch, and their front porch faces the road that they live on. And we're, talking and whatever, and a car drives by, and my mother-in-law said, "Who is that?" And I laughed, and we all kind of chuckled, but then I thought, somebody that's from the city, that has always lived in a subdivision or apartment complex or whatever, could not even possibly fathom the idea that typically if you live out there and your road is pretty much the only people that go on that road live on that road, right? They could not even comprehend why you would look at a random car driving by and be like, well, who is that? What are they doing out here? But it's a cultural thing whenever you're, especially from the rural South, that your neighborhood, your road, the people that, if it's somebody else in a car you don't recognize, they're probably an outsider, they might be lost. So that is absolutely a cultural thing that maybe you wouldn't recognize or think about.
That's funny. I like that.
That was normal.
Exactly. And a lot of the things that we think are just normal, typical is very just a part of our culture. So hopefully you can now recognize when something is maybe something that you have that's different from other people or is applicable to your culture. So this is the wheel of diversity. So this is what I like.
So tiny.
It is so tiny. I am so sorry. This is one of my favorite like examples. So I think even if you were introducing yourself to an alien, okay? An alien. They only have a vague understanding of what humans are as individuals, right? And you're just trying to give them 3 bullet point ideas of who you are so they can identify you and know you, right? I myself might say that, I might say my age, I might say my occupation, and I may say my culture, right? And we can see how those would all fall in different categories. If you said that you were active in the military in a particular time period, that can go right to the area in which the decade in which you're going, the world experience that you had, the world event that you took part in. And we can see how all those things encompass who we are as individuals. So I'm pretty sure they're gonna provide this as well. But if someone wants to give an example who can read that a little better than I can from over here, wants to look at that and kind of give me an example of something that they identify with that would fit into one of those categories. I know it's so tiny.
I can't see it from back here, so I can't help. Y'all gotta help me out. See it either.
So it's era, organization, external, internal. So era is the era in which we were born in. Some people may identify as a millennial or a Gen Z or a boomer or something like that. That might be something that they identify with, right? Organizational can just simply be like your profession, your job, the community that you live in. External can be things like your economic status, other things I can't read. Your family structure, things and experiences. Internal is your age, your physical description, your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, and gender, and we can see how that all kind of builds up into who we are.
I think it's important if you could see all of the things that are on that wheel, that somebody starting from the outside, going all the way in, could have the same. So they might be the same age, they might all be Hispanic, they might all come from they were raised in a single parent home with a single mother, but then once you get to that very middle portion, it's really important, and we'll talk about intersectionality in a little bit, which kind of encompasses this, but it's really important to understand that even if you're the same in all those areas with someone, that very middle portion of who we actually are and how that expresses in our personality can be completely different. Just like I have 4 kids, obviously they've had pretty much the same upbringing, culture, and everything, but they're very individual, different human beings on that personality level.
So like I said, this is a great way to just think about who we are as people and to recognize that every person we interact with is gonna fall in different areas of this category, and all those things influence, who we are, so this is an acronym I use for talking about cultural competency. We could all use a little makeup, which is just a fun, silly little phrase that'll kind of help you remember this. So makeup stands for mindset, awareness, knowledge, example / exercising, understanding, and persistence. So we start with mindset. So mindset is a willingness to grow and learn, and it's an openness to new ideas. I talk about mindset as walking into conversations, into experiences you're gonna have on a daily basis with an open mindset. With a mindset that says, I want to learn from this experience, I want to learn from this person, I'm willing to be open to what they say and how they feel and to grow from this experience. So that is one of the most important things, I think, in a lot of this is having that mindset. If you are in college, you walk to a college course and you say, I hate this subject, I'm not good at it, I'm not gonna learn anything from this is stupid, you're not gonna learn. You're not, because you've closed off yourself from that experience and from the opportunity to grow. And that applies to anything we do. If you walk into a conversation with somebody who maybe you don't like or haven't had a lot of conversations with, and you say, just cannot stand this person, I don't want to have this conversation. That may be true, but you have to have a willingness to overcome those feelings and learn and grow from that situation, to ever get to a place where you feel comfortable around them and where they feel comfortable around you. And to maybe even grow to learn that you love that person and they're someone you can get along with, right? Then we go to awareness. So that's just not just awareness of others, which is what we tend to think of. We like being aware of others, but it's also being aware of ourselves. So it's acknowledging our privileges and our biases and our point of view as our point of view, and recognizing how that can affect the conversations we're having and the experiences we're having. If we're aware that we have unconscious biases about a particular group, if we're aware that we have not a lot of experience interacting with somebody or a group, then we can recognize that and be willing to work around that feeling or that part of us and better understand that person and better understand ourselves so we can move forward and grow, right? It also comes down to awareness of others too. So that's also understanding that, like I said, every part of us that makes us unique and wonderful people, they have a part of them that makes them a unique and wonderful person, right? And so recognizing that just like you might have a bias, they have a bias. And we'll get into that a little bit later. I'll kind of explain that. Then we get to knowledge, which is listening, learning, and gaining knowledge needed. So I talk a lot about skills, listening skills, learning skills, active listening. Is one of the easiest ones to think about, because if I'm in a conversation with you, come into my office and try to tell me something, and I'm playing on my phone, or I've got my arms crossed, or I'm doing something else, I'm not active listening to you. I may be understanding what you're saying, hearing what you're saying, but if you don't feel like I'm hearing and listening to you, then that conversation is going to end where it started, right? We're not going to learn anything from each other. But if you're actively listening, you're making eye contact, you're using supportive questions, you're making sure that you're being understood and they're being understood, then you're creating a space where they feel seen and heard, right? Another of that is mutual understanding and trust, creating a space where not only do they trust that they can tell you what they need to tell you in that space, but that you can trust that you will be understood and they will feel understood in this situation, right? So that's really important as well. There's a lot of skills that go into the ability to gain knowledge. It's being adaptive in our communication, understanding that people just communicate differently. Some people are loud talkers, where every time they talk it sounds like they're yelling, and some people are very quiet and soft-spoken, and that is not an influence on maybe their emotions in that situation, or if they're nervous or angry. It just might be generally how they communicate, right? A great example of this communication style I like to make sure people keep in mind is direct versus indirect. So in some cultures, direct communication is what's important. In other cultures, they prefer indirect communication. And that's the difference between going into your office. Let's say I go into your office, and I say, hey, I need this paperwork by this time. And then I walk out. You say, okay, cool, and I walk out. Or coming into your office and saying, how are you? How's your mom? Oh yeah, I saw that you were at the park last week. That's so cool. I love that park. Oh, by the way, can I get that paperwork by this time today? So, one, I go into the office, I ask what I need, I get out. I've got the job done, that's what I needed. And the other one, I talk about other things, make sure that I'm spending the time to get to know the person, to communicate with the person, and then asking for what I need. Both of those things get the job done. Both of those things I was able to ask the question I need to ask. It's just a matter of which one I culturally am used to communicating as. A person who generally is a very direct person may be annoyed by someone who's very indirect. And someone who is very indirect and likes having that conversation may be annoyed or feel like the person is upset with them or doesn't want to talk to them if they're, talking to someone who's very direct, just wants to say what they want to say and get out, right? And so that's just something to keep in mind. Everybody has a variety of ways they communicate that works for them, and we have to be willing to understand and work with them to find a communication style that works best for their conversation together, right? Exercise an example, which is using what you've learned and being an example for others. So that's taking the knowledge that you have gained from listening and learning and being able to actually apply it to the conversations. So that might include just taking notes for yourself. If you know that you're going to be interacting with a person regularly and you want to make sure that you know certain things about them, that you're aware of their job and their name and maybe some details that will help you, you can take notes. Nobody's going to fault you for that. You can make sure that you're recognizing things about them that's helpful. If you know they always come into your office right before lunch and they probably need a snack, making sure you provide that and know that, this is just the way they operate, so maybe I can prevent them from, being hungry while they're in my office and feeling comfortable here.
You're talking about me, are you? I was.
We always have snacks in the office.
I get hangry.
But, using what you've learned from each individual person and maybe from groups of people and being able to help yourself adapt and help your environment adapt to help that person succeed in that environment. Understanding is for you, and it's creating an environment of understanding and respect. So obviously it starts with you as an individual exercising and being the example, but through that portion of you as an individual doing that, you're creating a space where people feel understood and they feel respected, and that is incredibly important. And then lastly, persistence. So being proactive and persistent with your cultural competency efforts. This isn't something we learn once, we do once, and then we're done. This is something we have to be actively doing throughout our lives, throughout every conversation that we have, we have to be actively trying to do, because it's not something we're always consciously aware of, so that we continue to grow and learn about the people around us and connect, right? Okay, so that's my little, for cultural competency. Okay, so I have a little activity that I want us to do before we get started on our next portion. It is really silly and it's fun, but I think it's a good way to kind of think about the concepts. So, okay, if you don't have paper, Becky's gonna come around, so raise your hand. But if you have a paper in front of you, I want you to get a pen, pencil, and I want you to draw a rectangle on about half of your sheet of paper. That just gives you a space to do it so you don't have to. It's a silly activity, but I think it really gets the point across. After you draw your little rectangle, I want you to draw, it's gonna be like this, a little rectangle, like a picture frame, like you see up there. I want you to draw the little shoulders and the head. So a circle with a little half circle underneath. We're gonna be drawing real self-portraits.
What are we doing again? Sorry.
You're good.
They can't hear you over here, Jack.
Okay,
So the rectangle needs to be kind of like a picture frame
picture frame.
that you could draw yourself.
Sorry. That's why we have extra paper, it's okay.
Yeah, you may need an extra sheet of paper.
If it's gonna end up looking something similar to that goofy little monster you see up there, okay? So you're gonna start with just the head and the shoulders. So kind of an oval for your head and a little for the shoulders.
Valued member of my team.
Fill up your spaces. There you go.
Vivian has this down. She's gonna.
There you go. Can I use yours for example? You're killing it. Love it.
Oh.
So like this. Like this, where it kind of fills up your space. So I'm gonna, you don't have to be good at drawing, this is just a fun thing that we do. So, once you got that done, I'm gonna list off a few things. I'm gonna have you add attributes to your little figurine, okay? So, the first thing I'll say is if you were born a woman, you identify as a woman, as someone who is female, I want you to draw big red lips on your face. Big red lips on your face. If you identify as man, you're born a man, you identify as male, I want you to draw a big old mustache. Yep, Tom Selleck, that's a good one. Big old mustache, be a handlebar mustache, just a big old mustache.
Mike Robinson mustache?
Yeah,
There you
yeah.
go.
We need to bring him in here.
All right. So, if you can be a big old clown nose, it can just be a big nose.
Sounds like profile.
Well, I'll explain in a minute.
Your ears and your nose never stop growing. I don't know if that's true or not.
If you are someone who is trying to think of a good one to kind of connect with you all. If you are someone who grew up in the place that you now live, you've always been there, I want you to draw 2 eyes on your face. If you at any point in time have lived outside of where you grew up, I want you to do 3 eyes.
You're not talking about the same house, you're talking about the same community.
Same community. I mean, same house, that's cool too, but same community. You've always lived in the same community.
2 eyes.
2 eyes. If you've always lived in the same community, 2 eyes.
The city that you live in now, 3 eyes if you've lived in other areas.
If you've ever lived outside of where you've been. Not traveled, but like lived. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. You lived. If you have some sort of invisible illness, whether that is a learning disability like ADHD or dyslexia, whether it's something like diabetes, whether it's some kind of illness or disability that you have that you deal with on a daily basis that people around you wouldn't just look at you and see. I want you to draw big old ears. It can be any animal you want, but big ears.
Animal ears?
Animal ears are fun. I like animal ears. I drew cat on mine, as you can tell.
But if not, regular ears, right?
Yep, if not, just regular ears.
Regular ears?
Yep. If you identify as Caucasian, white, American, leave your face how it is. If you identify as something other than white, Caucasian, American, I want you to draw like stripes or polka dots as your like skin.
Yeah, because it's cool.
All right. If you are someone whose religion is Christian, who identifies as someone who's Christian or Catholic, anything like that, I want you to just ignore these instructions altogether. You don't have to draw anything. If you identify as any other religion or atheist or anything like that, I want you to draw a tail behind you in the picture. So you see I got a tail behind mine in the picture? Yeah. All right, and then lastly, if you have never had to worry about money in your entire life, so you've never been in any situation at any point in your life where you have had to worry or think about money and not having what you want and need, I want you to give yourself bald Jeff Bezos hair, no hair at all, right? And if you've ever been at any point in your life felt as worried about money, felt as though you may not have what you want and need, I want you to give yourself goofy hair.
Goofy hair?
Goofy hair.
I just like to have some hair.
Okay. So, those are all the instructions I have for this. Obviously, mine's kind of color and stuff like that. I did it in my office. But once you're done, I want you to look around the people around you. I want you to look at the people around you's drawings. I want you to look at your own drawing.
Robinson, just with way more hair, yeah.
And we're going to think about a few things. So first and foremost, how many aspects of a person do we never see? A lot of these things are, some of these things are things we can identify. A lot of these things are things that we may not necessarily always be able to identify about a person, right? And how would your life change if this is what you really look like? If every aspect of who you are as a person was just as visible on your face as your eyes and your nose and your lips. Right? Thank you. So if all those portions of who you were, if every experience that you've had in your life, your disabilities, your abilities were visible on your face, if they're written across your forehead, do you think that people's perspectives of you would change? Understandings of you, how they talk to you, how they treat you, do you think they would change? Absolutely. I think we would be, you're more able to tell those things about people that you may not otherwise know. It's like knowing secrets about them, right?
I think it's good to understand too that for some people, if all of those things were visible in the way that it changed your appearance, if it was considered to be pleasing, to the eye or normal, then it would result in positive interactions, right? But if some of these things cause you to kind of make you look not so pleasing or not great, then that could absolutely result in negative interactions. So people could see all of the things that are different than them on your physical body. Not all the time.
And I like this exercise. You can do it with a variety of different criteria, right? I could do LGBT status. I could do like I said, learning disabilities and disabilities. I could do as two separate things. I could come up with a variety of situations that you may have been in your life. If you went to college, if you didn't go to college, if you got good grades in high school, if you had poor grades in high school, we could use those as criteria, and we could see how, if these things were always visible on our face, it would change dramatically how people perceive us and how they interact with us on a daily basis. So it's a good way to start thinking about bias and privilege, because if all those portions of us were visible, then we could see how we would treat each other differently, right? And so, last question I kind of have is, can this exercise help us to understand how those with differences from us might feel? So obviously these are things that maybe aren't so visible, but there are plenty of people who have visible disabilities, who are visibly a different culture than us, who are visibly a different faith than us. And this kind of helps us think about what would it be like to be in that position, right? I think that's good. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts on this exercise? I like this one, it's fun.
Not all of you have to go home and put that on your refrigerator.
Yes. I do encourage you to do it with other people, because I do think it's a good way to start thinking about stuff like this. So
I did it with my girls. My girls are 8 and 7. So for them, and I think a lot of kids are this way, not only do they sometimes notice differences pretty quickly, but they are a lot of times really comfortable to be like, why do they look like that? Why does that guy not have legs? Why does that boy, why can that kid not talk to me? I asked him a question and he's not talking back. They're able to kind of ask those questions and be curious in a way that isn't ill-intended or any type of ugliness in their heart. It's literally just curiosity. But it was a good way for them to understand there's things about you that make you different, but to the outside world, you look, you know, like pretty much every other kid, just a normal kid. But some kids, the things that make them different, they cannot hide it. It's right out there in the open, and sometimes people don't treat them great because of those things. So, yeah. Definitely a cool thing to use in your real life.
yeah, and it's fun. It kind of gets us thinking about it in a different way. So now we're going to talk about the two words that a lot of people just despise, which is bias and privilege, but I promise they're not bad words. They're not bad words, and everybody's got them. So having privilege and bias doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't mean that you're using them to harm other people. It doesn't mean that you haven't struggled in your life, and it doesn't put you in a position to be more or less than others, and it doesn't mean that you are even conscious of these. So the important understanding of bias and privilege is this phrase that I love, and I feel free to steal, which is you cannot walk in someone else's shoes till you take your own off, right? We always talk about walking in someone else's shoes, but to do that, you have to take your shoes off. You have to take that parts of you off so that you can experience things through people's lives. I love that. I love that. So addressing bias and privilege is a great way to analyze your similarities and differences with others and allow yourself to the opportunity to form meaningful connections with others across culture, socioeconomic groundings, etc. It helps you to identify spaces where you can use your privilege to lift up others and to allow them to have a space to speak. And it can also help you address biases that can allow us to work around misconceptions and stereotypes. So if we identify places that we may be biased, it helps us to work around those misconceptions and stereotypes and look at people, not as these things that are just kind of ingrained as through media and stuff of who we may think they are, right? So how else can acknowledging our bias and privileges positively affect our professional relationship? Does anyone want to add to that?
I just want to add really quickly, I have just been with the Owensboro Human Relations Commission coming up on a year. So kind of coming into this world of diversity, equity, and inclusion and talking about discrimination and bias and privilege. First of all, the first thing that I thought of with privilege was white privilege and immediately like shut down, right? And then the idea of bias, I'm like, I don't have biases. So that just being completely transparent and honest, that was my thought process. Whenever we dug dug into some of these trainings more, and some of the conversations, the opportunity, in this position, I've had so many fantastic opportunities to, I'm from Lewisport, Kentucky, so there was not diversity growing up in, any of my grades. So I really didn't interact or have the opportunity to have conversations with people that looked differently than me until adulthood, okay? So by adulthood, most of the time, most of your thoughts and ideas about people and how people work and what you think about people are pretty much kind of formed in your brain, whether that's from media, an interaction with, if you had one bad interaction with a person that looks a certain way, that can kind of form how you think about that whole group of people. So I encourage you guys in this section to really kind of, whatever like walls or anything that you put up in your brain about this topic, to kind of just set those aside for a second and think of this as an opportunity to be completely honest with yourself and your own head and heart about the way that you view other people that are different than you.
Yeah. Me and Becky make a great team because I talk about the subject and then she gets the conversation started. She gets people thinking about the topics we're doing. And I think that's wonderful. So we're going to talk about types of bias and privilege. So this is not all of them by any means that's listed up here, but we're going to go through them real quick. So socioeconomics, health versus illness, age, sexual orientation, color of your skin, physical appearance, gender, religion, ability/disability, ethnicity, education, access, language, gender identity, caste/status, physical ability, nationality, location. So these are some examples of different types of bias and privilege that you may have. I like to talk about privilege first because it's a little bit easier. So obviously, the one I like to do is location. If you live in a city, you have a location that we have easy access, which is another one, to things like medical care, the dentist office and the doctor, as well as grocery stores, parks, and stuff like that. Now, if you live out in the country, it may take you 15 to 30 minutes to get in town, and then another 10 or so to get to where you need to go. So we can see how our location can give us certain kinds of privileges. You happen to have a location, you may also have the privilege of having a big yard, but you have a disadvantage by having to drive farther to get the things you need, right? We can think about access as that, as well as access to healthy foods. If a lot of college towns have areas where college students live, and around them there's not a lot of grocery stores, there's usually fast food restaurants, gas stations and stuff like that. There's not a lot of grocery stores. So a lot of college students have trouble getting fresh groceries. Again, access, a lot of dorm rooms don't have places where they can cook. If they do, it's usually like a small kitchen tucked away somewhere in the building. And so there's also that restriction that allows them to not have as much access to fresh, affordable, healthy food as someone who is not living in a college town or not living in a dorm room, right?
Another one for access that a lot of you probably deal with your constituents is access to high-speed internet. So I know in our area, especially during 2020 when everything was shut down, there were kids that literally had no access to go to school. They lived either too far out to have access to any internet. Their parents worked full-time, so that schools did their best, and they provided buses in different areas with Wi-Fi connections. So parents, they even offered some free meals at certain locations so parents could drive the kids to that spot and they could do their schoolwork or their classes or whatever, get fed, whatever. So they tried to bridge that gap, but it absolutely put those kids in those areas without access at a disadvantage for those 2 years of their school. Whereas my kids were privileged enough, we have multiple devices. So they have 4 kids, they could all access all of their things that they needed all day long for school. So they were, which of course, I don't know about you guys, but my kids don't even remotely think that they're privileged. They think that they're very mistreated. But the idea that very tangible example of kids in our community having access to that high-speed internet can dramatically affect their education.
Yeah. A lot of these we've thought about before, but may not have thought about every aspect of how it applies. Even skin color, we think of it, we do talk and discuss white privilege and privilege of ethnicity and stuff like that. But when it comes to skin color, there's also privilege in being able to go to the store and find the shade of makeup you need. I know I can go to the store and find 3 different.
That's really, really hard.
I can go to a store and find 3 or 4 different shades. I think there's women who have darker complexions than me that have a hard time finding makeup. I know my mom has a darker complexion than me, and she even struggles finding makeup that suits her complexion. I'm Hispanic, so that gets a little context. She does actually have a darker complexion and not necessarily a undertone that would match every makeup brand, right? And so that's something we can think about when we think about skin color. Physical appearance. It's a funny example, but it's actually a real one if you've ever been in it. Pretty privilege is a thing, okay? I know we've all been in a situation where somebody who is conventionally attractive, you've seen them either on TV or in an actual environment, has gotten a privilege or been allowed to do something or been, forgiven for something that otherwise wouldn't have been if they don't think we would have had that privilege if they weren't as physically attractive as they were. I think that's
funny
something.
example is you think about movies and like the bouncers at the door of clubs and they're
Oh,
like,
yeah,
do you
that's a
go?
great one.
Do you go? No, you're not. You're not allowed in.
Yeah.
But that in real life, somebody's physical appearance can absolutely affect how other people treat them.
Yeah, and it comes down to bias as well. I mean, just the way our brains work, if you see someone as you deem someone more attractive, you're more likely to feel comfortable around them than necessarily if you see something about them that doesn't fit that standard. And so we can think about how all these things would apply to a variety of different situations. Does anyone have any examples or questions about any of the categories here? Questions like I can try to give you an example, anything like that.
Another for physical appearance that is I've seen really commonly. My mom is a larger woman, and even actually, Jaklyn and I experienced this. Our local boutiques, right? So locally owned shops. Most of them, and some of you ladies might have understood this or seen this, go up to maybe a large or an extra large, right? And I'm traditionally, like a 10, 12, kind of an average size person, but some of our local boutiques, I tried to shop for New Year's, and literally their largest size was too small. And I thought, literally in that moment, because like I said, my mom is a larger woman, always has been, I had kind of a moment of a glimpse into what she only shops online, and what she feels like whenever she shops for clothes, that it's not accommodating and she doesn't feel welcome in that place. And Jaklyn was like, I'm not even gonna go in there. It's just being realistic about what is available and that things are catered to a certain size of people.
Yeah,
That's why
another
you see all
example.
the little tiny clothes are always still there, because all of us regular size people have bought the few they had. And so you go and you're like, oh, 0, oh, 2, great, those women are there. No, we don't
And
have them.
honestly, it can go the opposite spectrum. So when I was in high school, before I had children, and then went over 35, and my metabolism slowed down, I had the opposite problem. So I would try to shop for jeans, and you know what I mean, couldn't find anything that fit me well. So it can go both sides. But basically, it's the idea that in a space, because of what's provided, you feel like you're at a disadvantage for something that you can't necessarily control.
For men as well, I'm sure there's men in this room who have either experienced this or had friends that experienced this. Not every store has a big and tall section. And people who are taller, who may be bigger in size, more muscular, may not always be able to find things that are accessible to their body size. And
Or you can only get it online.
Or you can only get it online,
Can't
which is
get
just
it
annoying, honestly. So, like I said, there's a variety of examples for each of those of how bias and privilege may affect them. Yeah.
I have a question on the location. So a hot topic is polling locations.
Mm-hmm.
And, traditionally, we had a lot of polling locations in the county. COVID really hurt volunteer poll workers because some of them were pretty aged and some of them died. So it's becoming very difficult to find volunteers for poll workers. So that's just one of the thoughts. Also, county budgets are more restrained. Each polling location that you have increases the county budget that it's already strained. So
That's something that we dealt with in our area also.
Yeah.
when you have someone that makes a choice to live in the farthest stick of the county, like you were talking about, they've made that choice. That's who they are, but they're asking for a new polling location for 15 voters. So at what point do you draw the line for inclusiveness?
Right.
And
You draw
and
it where you can a
economy?
lot of times. So obviously for some people it is a choice. They chose to live out there. For other people it wasn't. So for maybe their newly 18-year-old son, they're living with their parents. They may not have the choice one way or the other. For someone who may be low income and doesn't have the opportunity to move, whose family has always lived out there, so yes, for some people there is a choice. For some people it's just the situation they've been placed in. And that really comes down to, what are you able to do? And if you can't necessarily put a polling location out there, maybe work with, we have some organizations
We
working
offer
with
transportation
that provided
for a lot of,
transportation.
people in the
Making
area.
sure they have information about mail-in and that, they know what that is. And so it may not come down to necessarily being able to completely accommodate how they would like, but making sure they at least have access, which is.
And when you're considering privilege and your own privilege, kind of the key part of this is not just to acknowledge that for some people, it's really hard to get to a polling location, but other thing than, talking about voting is, your job schedule. So for some people that work shift work, the access to the polling or to be able to vote is very difficult for them to make that work, and they may have to go way out of their way time-wise or pay for extra hours for their kids at the sitter so that they can go after work, whatever that looks like. But for me, just considering privilege, we have a pretty flexible schedule. So the last time I went and voted, it was literally just kind of a gratefulness of, there's a polling location 5 minutes from my house. I have the freedom to come into work a little bit late, and we texted, hey, I'm going to vote. And I was privileged in that. It was an easier job for me to be able to do that. So even just acknowledging that something for you is way easier than it is for somebody else
This could be
is
incredibly
acknowledging that privilege.
Yeah.
So I heard someone say mail-in ballots, and, what was the other constellation? Early voting, are those acceptable measures
Absolutely.
that-
Yeah,
Absolutely.
That's a
Anything that you
combination.
can do to bridge that gap and make it possible, and the first step is literally just understanding.
Yeah.
They're not choosing not to vote, it's just way harder for them. And if you have that first step, that is definitely a starting point
Yeah.
towards coming up with solutions.
But that is a great example, because I feel like that is something that we think about a lot. I am gonna touch a little bit on bias as well, because like I said, all these have to apply for privilege, but they can also apply to bias as well. So you may have, we have certain stereotypes that we think about people from certain locations. Whether you see someone, if people who have grown up in the South go other places, people make assumptions about who you are based on where you're from. So that can be applicable to that as well. Same with education, ethnicity, language that you speak, people who may not necessarily grown up speaking English, who are learning it as a second language. So we can see how all these things also apply to bias as well.
I have a great example for that.
Go for it.
Through my job, I've been able to work with a bunch of individuals that are doing ESL classes. So in Owensboro, we have a pretty large influx of immigrants, and they're kind of from all over the place. So the ESL class that I volunteer with, there's 5 different languages represented. They're from all different areas, and they're all adults. Okay, so my thought process going in was, and again, this is just, your brain kind of thinking everybody else has the same experience that you do, is that all of these individuals are very fluent reading and writing and speaking their own language. They just need help figuring out how to speak English, right? Well, I very quickly learned that some of these women, because they're Burmese, literally have never picked up a pencil. They've never had the opportunity to even learn how to write their own language. So coming into a whole new country, they know no one, they do not speak the language, and they're literally learning how to draw letters for the first time. So that is a bias that was in my brain, and to be completely honest, before interacting with a lot of people that are learning English as a second language, if I heard someone, say a Hispanic person, speaking English, broken English, strongly accented English, my brain automatically goes to, they're less educated than me. Your brain kind of magically makes that jump, right? But I learned really quickly, okay, some of these people are amazingly talented, intelligent in their own language, but now they're learning a second language. So guess what? They're smarter than me because I know one language. So that is definitely kind of a real life example of how my bias kind of smacked me in the face, because it was definitely a humbling moment to realize they're overcoming huge challenges to try to succeed here.
So as we're on the subject of bias, there are 2 main types of bias. However, there are many forms of biases that kind of fall under this umbrella. So bias is essentially your brain's way of protecting you. Your brain will make quick and impulsive decisions to prevent harm. So whether that's seeing somebody who is acting odd as you're walking down the street and your brain says, go to the other side of the sidewalk, we're not doing that. Or it's maybe a portrayal of a particular type of person in the media, or a negative experience you've had with somebody who looks similar to somebody else. That makes an imprint on your brain. It's something that you put in your little knapsack that you carry, or everybody has that they carry around with you, and you keep it, right? And the process of analyzing our biases takes those things out of the bag, looks at them, decides what to keep that's still protecting us and still keeping us safe, and what to maybe acknowledge and try to work to throw out, right? So I love that example. For a lot of women, who have maybe had negative experiences with, I'm trying to find the best way to do this without, addressing it.
I can give the elevator example.
Oh, yes, that's a good one.
Okay, so the idea of bias that's really kind of concrete and relatable to me is, imagine, ladies in the room, you're by yourself, you're at a hotel in a strange city, right? And you're gonna run down to the lobby to grab a snack or whatever. And the elevator door open, and it's a group of 20-something young guys, right? 6, 7 dudes. Do you wanna get in the elevator? Probably not. They might be the greatest, nicest guys in the world, but you immediately feel kind of a self-preservation of, I might wait for the next one. It's not anything against those guys that are in the elevator. They might all be wonderful gentlemen who love their mothers, but they could absolutely represent a danger for you. So that is a way that bias can help you stay safe, and it doesn't mean you hate a group of people. It doesn't mean you can't stand them because of what they look like. It means your brain is physically alerting you to a possible danger.
One of the biggest things to remember as we talk more about unconscious bias, which is the biggest part of bias that we all have, is bias is often in direct conflict with our values and beliefs, and rather a leftover portion of an experience or a learned behavior. If you grew up in an environment that spoke negatively about a particular group of people, you grow up and may not believe any of that. You may have friends that are of that group and may think that was spoken to you as a child is complete nonsense and it's not true. But there's still going to be portions of your brain that are left over from those lived experiences. And like I said, sometimes a bias can be beneficial. It can keep us safe. It's an impulsive decision that keeps us away from harm. But other times we have to analyze why we had a certain reaction to a certain situation or a person or a group of people, and decide whether it is to keep us away from harm or if it's a leftover thing from an experience that we have gained over our lifetime, right? So we are going to quickly go over conscious and unconscious. So conscious bias is the bias we see. It's the lady in Walmart who is saying negative things and harassing a person of color. It's those things we see on like social media where you're like, okay, that person is clearly biased, racist, misogynistic, whatever. They are clearly doing something wrong and actively portraying that they are biased against a particular group. Unconscious bias is the thing that all of us deal with, myself included. Unconscious bias refers to biased attitudes that operate outside of our awareness or control. So that may be because of our lived experience or learned experiences. You walk down the street and see a person of color, and without intentionally doing it, without saying, I'm gonna do this thing, you may pause, scoot to one side, or something like that. Now, for the most part, you would never recognize that as something. You may wave to that person, talk to that person, how's your day? Nice seeing you, and go on about your day. But the impulsive decision that your brain made to do that can reflect in that other person some kind of disdain for them. That may make them feel uncomfortable. Now you catch yourself, you recognize yourself doing that. All it is working around those impulsive decisions that your brain makes, right? If you catch yourself doing that, take the opportunity to stop and have a conversation with that person. Take the opportunity to shake their hand. Work around the biases that your brain is doing just because it's trying to protect you and doesn't know any better, and try to work around those. There's 1,000 examples I could say. If you have an experience where you see somebody in a store and your brain automatically maybe makes fun of them or makes an assumption about them, stopping yourself and saying, I don't know this person. There's no reason for me to make that assumption. You see someone dressed in dirty clothes and something, you think, oh wow, they must be struggling in life. Or you make a negative comment, stopping yourself and say, no, they may have just gotten off of work. They may have been helping their mom move furniture around. They may have been gardening and they just came straight from that to go do something else. That I don't know anything about this person. So stopping and analyzing your own behavior is a really good thing to do with those unconscious biases.
Do you remember the story about the coal miner that went to the NBA game?
Yes, I love that story.
Perfect
It's so
example of
cute.
what
It's
you
so
said.
cute. So we have not, we may not be aware of this, of biases and attitudes we hold towards certain things or certain people. In a lot of towns, even in Owensboro, we've noticed that sometimes there's like, not necessarily intentional negativity, but just, less of a willingness to accept people that are not from the area into certain groups or for certain conversations. That doesn't mean we have outward bias towards them. It just means that I've known these people my whole life. I've been in this group forever. It's kind of weird to accept someone new who maybe hasn't had the same lived experiences as me. And it's not intentionally meant to hurt their feelings. It's just something you have to work around. And there is no malicious intent in that unconscious bias. You never go for it intending to hurt someone's feelings.
And unconscious bias is the one that you really have to bring in the honesty aspect, because
Yes.
it's easy, if you wanna protect your own ego or your own personal feelings about yourself, it's easier to be like, I'm not biased against people. There's not any particular group that I think badly about or have preconceived notions or whatever. It's easy to stay in that mind space, but it takes a little bit of courage and can be a little bit humbling to be completely honest with yourself about what some of those biases that exist in your brain can impact the way that you treat people and interact with people.
A good example. Okay. I want you all to be honest. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see your hand.
Well, I think that this group right here, speaking, my husband's mayor, and I know he has this issue too. I think our generation, and I'm talking about those of us in here that are older, look at the younger generation as a whole as a group that's not dedicated, aren't loyal, aren't reliable, dependable, and I think we group them all together like that.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a bias that directly impacts the people that are in this room right now to find employees, retain employees, and, serve their
Yeah.
constituents. So,
Yeah.
how would you address that?
I think there's an understanding of, I'm trying to think of the right word.
I can
The
add to
work,
that.
yeah, I got one. I'm trying to think of the word. Give me a second. Work-life balance. There's a work-life balance that wasn't as inherent in generations past as it has
Absolutely.
been there. There's an
Absolutely.
aspect of mental health awareness that young people have now that wasn't a focus of people that, so they deem certain characteristics as negative when it's really more of a self-preservation of something they've been taught to do because it's for their better judgment. And so that kind of rubs heads, and it can also be, I've been doing this for a long time, I definitely have more information. It's sometimes difficult to see someone else come in and try to change the way you've done things, or try to provide information that doesn't fit in what you've always done. So I think that is a wonderful thing to think about, and just being aware that every person that comes into you, regardless of their age, is gonna have something to add to the conversation that you simply can't, right? And I'll let you go as well.
I was just gonna speak from my husband's a business owner, so, dealing with the hiring, firing, getting people to show up to work on time, all of those things are very relevant in his, everyday life, and something that he's had to do that could also, I'm sure, be utilized on more of a city, level, is, understanding, not just making that assumption, because some of the things that you said about a younger generation may be true. They may call in to work more often. They might not show up to work at a specific time and have like my husband cannot understand calling in sick. This man, if he has the flu, he's like, well, I just won't talk to anybody. I'll close my office door. He's going to work. If
And
he's
you know,
alive, he's going
That
to
is
work.
so funny, because even in our own office, with you being of the same, generation with him, that.
If I'm sick, I'm staying home.
Right.
I'm texting
And
Jaklyn,
it's
hey, I'm not
also
coming in today.
a mentality of the environment is.
Yes, but he has had to recognize and kind of give allowances for, he also has a lot of employees that have younger kids that require childcare. So his initial reaction is, it's not my problem, find childcare for your kids. But he, over time, has understood that it's not necessarily even a lack of preparation on their part. Some of you probably realize there's a lack of affordable and quality childcare in your areas, right? So the way that he has bridged that gap, if he has created an office space where if his employees need to bring their kids, they can, their kids are safe, they're entertained, and then they can continue to do their job. So a lot of it comes down to maybe even acknowledging some of the truth in the generational differences, and then figuring out how you can bridge that gap and accommodate some of those differences so that your employees can still be successful.
2 additional points to that. A lot of this generation has come into adulthood in the time of the pandemic, where so much of the way in which we work has changed dramatically. And they have been able to see how it has changed for the better in some places. I know that we have the ability to work from home with our job, and it has been tremendous in helping with childcare, with illness, with me making sure the maintenance guy comes to my apartment when different things, travel, that wasn't something that was accessible a long time ago. And then the secondary part of that is also recognizing that I'm sure if an older person walked into an environment that was predominantly dominated by young people, let's say a tech company, they're also gonna be in a position where the people who are predominant in that are looking down on them as well. So they may think because of your age that you don't know technology, that you're gonna struggle with certain tasks, that you're gonna have difficulties, that, they may make assumptions about you. So also recognizing that, there's a portion that makes assumptions on both
It goes
sides.
both ways.
Yeah, and that's beneficial as well, because then you can start having those conversations. Yeah, and maybe just having a conversation like, this is something that I've noticed you're struggling with. Is it something we can help with? Is it something that we can work around? What's going on? Because having conversations is a big portion of that. Yeah.
Well, and maybe there's also a side of the bias of the young side.
Exactly.
That you probably need to have some humility is that you don't know it all.
Mm-hmm.
And you can probably learn from
The older
the older
generation.
generation, whoever else.
Absolutely.
Because when you came into the workplace, you thought you had it figured out, and you had to learn from people ahead of you as well, more than likely. But I think there needs to be some, both sides.
It's gotta be
out
give
there
and
to
take
say,
from
hey,
both
hey, I don't
sides.
have it all
Absolutely.
figured out yet.
Yeah, and
What
that's
did
where
you
those.
do to help, that can help me?
Yeah, and that's where those conversations come into play. Just sitting down and having a conversation is, obviously there's a generational gap here. I want us to work together because I like that you do these things, you've been helpful in this, I've helped you with this, how can we come together and work better? So really, like I said, with that cultural context, it's a matter of just having those conversations, which can be incredible. Yeah, thank you, I think those are great, that's a really great example. Okay, so explaining privilege. First and foremost, I know diagram is itty bitty, I'm so sorry. We're just gonna ignore it because I think I say what I need to say, and the rest of it. So explaining privilege. Privilege may not mean that you have power over anyone else, but it is rooted often in a system of power. So we all know that there has been systems of power at play in our world that are unfair. One of the examples on the little diagram, I think, because I can't see it, are ability and disability. People who have disabilities have often been in positions where they have not had power over their situation, over their placement in life, for generations. Also, people who have disabilities are not often the people in the boardrooms making the policies, are not often the people in the government who are making the policies about their own disabilities. So we can see how power has a dynamic role in their lived experience, right? Does that make sense? I think that's a good example that kind of gives us an idea. And that's applicable to kind of all the subjects that are in that diagram. First and foremost, privilege is not just about race. When we did this presentation with Brad, our Owensboro Judge Executive gave a wonderful example of privilege. She says, I like to think of privilege as blessings. And now I use that every time because I love it. It's a great way to think about it. Some people are just inherently blessed with things that they have no control over whether or not they have. They're just blessed with it because that is what the universe intended. That is what God intended. They're just simply blessed with that. You may be blessed with a particular set of skills that someone else isn't. You may be blessed by your position that you got simply because you were able to go to college and get a certain degree that someone else might not have had the opportunity to do. You may be blessed by having a family that is well connected, or a family that is, has had money for a while. And the same goes in reverse. You may be, not have those blessings because of the situation you put in. Does that mean that you can't all get to the same space? Absolutely not. Everybody could eventually get to the same space. We just have to understand that because of certain people's positions in this base of privilege, things may be easier or more difficult for one individual than they are for another. So it doesn't mean that you haven't struggled in your life or had negative experiences. It simply means that this particular identity you have was not the reason for the struggle or made worse by it. So one person may have a privilege that helps them in one situation, another space may cause them a struggle. Another good example, like we talked about age. I'm going. Another example I used about age works for that as well. In one situation, being the younger person may deem you as less qualified, and in the reverse, being the older person may present you as less qualified. So we can see how that works in reverse, and then we can utilize our privilege to lift others and help them. So most of you as elected officials or people that are in a position of power, you have the wonderful opportunity to use that position of power to lift up the voices around you and allow them to have a space to speak and to be heard. So I'll move past that because we have like one activity left. Okay, so intersectionality. I'm gonna pass out some pencils and we're gonna do this little activity. So she's gonna do that while I run through intersectionality, my last activity, and then we'll be done, I promise. Okay, so intersectionality is where everything meets. So if you look at this diagram up here, we can see all these different characteristics, attributes of who people are, and how they all kind of overlap. So the overlapping of different aspects of people's lives is essentially what intersectionality is. It's understanding that an individual isn't just one thing. I am not just female. I'm not just Hispanic. I am a Hispanic female. And we can see how those two things separate may put me in certain situations, and then those two things together may put me in another situation. Right? A person may fall into a variety of categories that put them at an advantage or disadvantage or otherwise affect their lives. Clients and staff, sorry, I can't read. Clients and staff are affected by the intersections of their identity, and it can affect the needs and wants from your organization. So you may have someone who comes in and not only is someone who has a disability, but is also a mother. So not only are you having to make sure you're accommodating for that disability, making sure they're getting what they need to survive in your business, but also understanding that there's an aspect of them also having children, which they have to care for, which may also influence their ability to do their job. And so we're gonna do a little intersectionality activity, which is one of my favorites. So I'm gonna give you the rules first. So she's passing out paper and pencils. So I'm going to give criteria that you have to follow to accomplish the task. The task is I want you to draw flowers on your piece of paper. So,
Using only the material.
only the material and only the instructions you've been given. So, I'm gonna split the room down the middle first. I want this half of the room to use your regular hand, and this one to use your non-dominant hand. All right? Yep. And then I'm gonna have people that are on the inside of this little semicircle. I want you to flip your page upside down. You're gonna draw your picture upside down. Okay? If you've already been given instructions, previously, just ignore all these rules. You've accomplished your task. Okay? If you were given when you walked in, just ignore me. We'll get to that in a minute. If you're on the very back wall or you're in the very front row, I want you guys to draw with your eyes closed. Okay, and I'm gonna give you all about 5 minutes once everything is passed out to accomplish these two.
I think you might need, once I get these out,
Yeah.
to
Reiterate?
Yeah.
Yep, got it. I'm trying to make sure I'm not too, I don't want your piece of paper.
Yes, ma'am. You drew the short straw.
Yep. I'll do it, I'll repeat the instructions in a second. Ignore me.
So if you want to cut it off, you go right ahead.
All right, to reiterate, people on this side of the room are going to be drawing with their non-dominant hand. People on the inside are gonna have their drawings upside down and have to draw in reverse. People on the back row and the front few people up on the very front row, I want you to make your drawings with your eyes closed, and if you were given instruction at the beginning of this presentation, please disregard all rules. I'm gonna give you guys about 5 minutes to do this, maybe 3, and then we will talk about it. All right, go for it. This is so much fun. I love this activity. Oh, I'm sorry.
Pam, you can't draw anyway.
I was just going with it, I figured I'd think. I can't draw.
doesn't leave an eraser mark.
It's been always been.
All right, finish up your drawings, and I would like my, pick 3 people that got rules ahead of time to go ahead and like hold up your drawings so people can look at them.
This is embarrassing.
Oh, man, yeah.
3 people. Right? Okay. I want you guys to look at these. I would like some people to kind of hold up there so everybody can look around. So if you want to hold your drawing up, I encourage you to do so. It doesn't have to be good. It's kind of fun. All right. Awesome. So if you can put them down now. If I were to say to you guys, I'm going to grade you on how well you did drawing these flowers, and if you didn't draw well, then I'm going to tell you that you have to sit through this presentation again until you draw it right. Would that be fair or completely unfair?
Completely unfair.
Completely unfair. Some of you had one thing that was different, whether it was just I had to draw with my non-dominant hand, or I had to draw upside down. Others had a bunch of things were different. So I would like to ask those people who did not have a sharpened pencil, how was your experience? Did you feel like you could accomplish this task?
I use the eraser.
Some people, yes. Yeah, some people get creative with that and they use it. Some people don't even try. They see the pencil with nothing on it and they're like, why even try? Why even put in the effort? So this is our example of intersectionality. I think it gives us a good idea. Some people have no struggles at all. They have nothing that is pushing against them in what they're trying to accomplish, right? For those people who were given instructions early, you didn't have to worry about any of this. Your drawing was done before we even started. You had colored, you had markers, you got plenty of time, you knew about everything beforehand. But those of us who had all the struggles with their drawing upside down, they have their using their non-dominant hand, they may have had their eyes closed while they were drawing. They had a bunch of different struggles that were put on top of them. And if we were to grade them simply on, but you had a pencil, that wouldn't be fair. Everybody had a pencil, but that doesn't mean that everybody's drawing is gonna be the same. So we can see how this applies to intersectionality, and I hope this is a good way to kind of end our presentation and thinking about how all of us have struggles, have difficulties in our lives, and have privileges. And those can directly influence our ability and capability to do things on a daily basis. So I think this gives us a good idea of intersectionality, and I hope you kind of enjoyed it. And if you love your drawing, you should take it home and put it on your friends. Do you have anything else to say around this activity?
I just want to say I appreciate all of you guys' attention, the open-mindedness to come into the room. I personally am not usually a huge fan of trainings, especially if it's a training that's a requirement of me. So some of you might have came in today and be like, oh gosh, we have to do this DEI training. I don't even know what this is for. But our hope and our goal with all of our trainings is that at the end of it, you feel like you've been able to be honest with yourself. You've maybe recognized some things about yourself and the way you interact with others in ways that you can improve. Ways that you can take what you've learned today into your everyday life, not just your professional life, but your personal life. And I also have a challenge for everyone in this room. If your friends, your pastor, your hairdresser, all the people that you have close daily contact with look like you, I encourage you to change that. I encourage you to try to make new friends, to make new colleagues that come from different backgrounds, that maybe physically look different than you, that maybe have a completely different set of values, because as individuals, that's the best way to be the best version of yourself, is to open yourself up to those opportunities and things that you can learn from people that are different than you.
Absolutely. So we do one more slide, but like I said, I think they're sending it out. So just reflect on the things that are mentioned here. I'm not gonna read them off. I'll give you the chance to kind of look at them while you guys get ready to eat. And just think about what we can take from the day and use in our daily lives. So thank you guys so much. Thanks, guys. Also, I brought a box of goodies, and there's like pens and those little things that you can put your cards in up there. So feel free to take as many as you'd like.
Did you say we're gonna get these slides?
I believe so. I think
Yes,
that's what
we will send them out, so Jaklyn, Becky, thank you guys so much. Thank you for coming so far together. Let's give them another round of applause, please. And everyone, if you don't mind, make sure you sign in before you depart the room, and we do have lunch for you between now and the board meeting at 1:30, so you're free to go. Thank you.